For over 30 years, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest has been touted as one of the easiest RPGs to be released in the West. But despite that, a complicated secret lies just beneath the game's surface. In order to dive into this forbidden tech, we need to talk about how I almost made a terrible mistake, one which was only averted by sheer luck. All of the top speedruns of Final Fantasy Mystic Quest required the skill of quick menuing, great decision-making skills in weird situations, and most of all, luck. This game is notorious in the speedrunning community for completely destroying runs at almost any point in the game. Died on Ice Golem? Reset. Didn't get a floor 6 Pazuzu? Time to throw the cart in the trash. All of these things and more kept top runs untouched for ridiculous amounts of time, with a runner named Elmagus having the top time in the any percent category. My original plan was to go through and see how lucky the run actually was, but I ran into a couple of problems. First, I wasn't subscribed to Dr. Swelman's channel on YouTube. Second, a lot of chances of certain things happening, like status effect moves hitting, attacks being a critical hit, and even the encounter formations on many of the fights were not really documented. A Super Nintendo RPG in 2021 not having much technical documentation is something that is absolutely unheard of. So I thought to myself, if you want something done, then just do it yourself, idiot. Rather than dive into the game's memory, since my technical know-how is like that of my grandpa trying to work a smartphone, I was going with the estimation route. Starting with critical hits, I took each character and landed 100 attacks on enemies to get a good average of critical hit ratios. This took me a couple hours of sitting down in my room with the turbo controller and playing SMT5 at the same time. Great game, by the way. Then I started going through Elmagus' run and tried to write down all the encounters he took, first strikes he got, and many other aspects of RNG in his run. While I was coming up with some interesting numbers, I made it to the Alive Forest part of the run before taking a break and trying to think of ways to make it easier on myself. So I went to Twitch to have something up in the background, and I just so happened to catch a top Final Fantasy Mystic Quest speedrunner by the name of PK4787. I started asking questions about the game, and I began to realize something. That video was not going to work. Give me a second to explain. A tech-savvy gamer by the name of Possum Morpheus explained to me that I'd been going about this all wrong. I asked if critical hit ratios differed between each character. Since my general results left Tristram and Phoebe with much higher ratios than Benjamin, it turned out it was all just a coincidence. You see, the critical hits obtained in Final Fantasy Mystic Quest are actually frame-based. Elmagus and a couple of other runners were actually privy to this back in 2013. You can imagine how devastated I was when hours of work was flushed down the drain with just one sentence. But that wasn't even the craziest part of it all. As a matter of fact, a lot of things I thought were static chances were incredibly far from that. To understand the concept of Mystic Quest's last secret, we need to talk about a runner who pushed his way up the Mystic Quest speedrun leaderboards, Calamity. Calamity started running Mystic Quest back in 2018, working on the any percent category to start, but his involvement in the grand scheme of things would start long before he did his first stream on Twitch. Remember when I was talking about Possum schooling me in how the game works? Well, Possum's been around for a very long time. Not necessarily the Final Fantasy Mystic Quest community, but he's actually friends with Calamity's brother. And he's been friends with him for a long time. When I say a long time, we're talking about the late 1990s. And only later would he become friends with Calamity in the late 2000s. Now this by itself doesn't mean too much for the Mystic Quest speedrunning scene, but as Calamity started improving his times, he began working on the 100% category of the game. This category is about a good 50 minutes longer than any percent due to the requirement of Lava Dome's completion and other things that the any percent run does not do. When he went to 100%, he worked on a more optimized route for the category alongside Possum, who also loved the game in his childhood. While diving into optimizing the route, Possum found out some incredible things about the game. Possum discovered that some enemies and bosses follow certain scripts. Sphinxes in the early game will always try to use Riddle on Phoebe, and the eyeballs in Pazuzu's tower will always try to blind Kaylee. In the Medusa boss fight, if you defend on the first turn, her script of what she does changes completely. Not only did those things occur, but while diving in, Possum discovered a few interesting things. We already knew about the critical hits being based on certain 1/60th of a second points, but now we have even more things being looked at, like the game's encounters. Encounters in Mystic Quest are all shown in the overworld, unlike most other entries in the series at that time, so you'll always have a static number of encounters in your run. However, the fights themselves can have different enemies come into battle. This is why you see some runners run away and reset the encounter for a better group of enemies. But what if you didn't have to do that? What if every encounter in the game could be an optimal formation with a first try clear? Well, the encounters in the game are filed into 8 different tables, and each of these tables have 255 frames to work with. Encounter formations in these tables are actually being rotated every 34 frames. These tables appear to change in between floors and can potentially be tracked to find out what encounters are coming up. For example, if you're on table 1, you'll get encounters based on that table on that floor. When you advance floors, the table changes and the potential encounter formations change as well. So imagine if you came up to an enemy and it would potentially be a bad encounter formation when you go into the battle. You can wait a little over half a second to change that encounter to something more desirable. Other things were actually found to be frame dependent as well, and possibly even in a frame rotation like the encounters. Things like getting a first strike, being surprised, and many other things use a sort of complicated frame selection mechanic. Even attacking has frame-based implications. Basically, the higher your accuracy stat, the more frames you have to land an attack, and thus, more frames to land a critical hit. Knowing all this, the static chances of moves being used, encounters happening, and so on that I believed to be true just simply fell apart. So the chances I was researching before with Elmagus's run were muddled in this new information that had been dropped on me. Unfortunately, even with all this being found, another problem arose. Possum had the information on hand to make some crazy things happen in the game, but since a lot of these are frame-based and their tables in which they operate have not been deciphered, they're not useful in a single segment setting. However, one could try to use this information for segmented runs and even tool-assisted speedruns. Speaking of tasks, even though it's not published on taskvideos.org, there is one that was made by a runner named Yggdrasil of the 100% category, completed in 2 hours, 29 minutes, and 57 seconds. Even though this was completed in April 2018, it seemed to confirm a lot of the tech that was uncovered by Possum. In the world of tasking, you thankfully don't need to decipher these values, since you can save state and use trial and error to push through with the RNG that you need. A lot of this information was brought to light in 2018, so fast forwarding to almost 2022, surely there would be an application for this now, right? Well, around the time Calamity stopped running Mystic Quest, Possum also stopped his dive into the values that the game contained. Though most of the information regarding how the game handled randomness and other weird things were uncovered, there were still important facts that were missing. There were some details about enemy attack formulas that were still unknown, like the fact that enemies can crit with magic, but the party can't. However, something even more important wasn't completed. It actually didn't fall within the game itself, but it can make use of these values in a way that would work even in a single segment setting. So how can we unwrap the last secret of Mystic Quest? Many Super Nintendo speedrunning communities these days have excellent practice hacks and resources. While diving into the game's code and figuring out what it does is one thing, making use of it and turning it into something runners can use is a whole other ballgame. The first thing we could see happening is someone making a Lewis script that would pull up the values for display in an emulator. Remember the encounter tables and the 34 frame rotations I mentioned earlier? Even though we can't directly see what table we are on, with a little bit of creativity, it's possible to separate which encounter sets we're working through. Remember how I mentioned in a given table, there's a 255 value set? That means there's 7.5 possible encounter formations. If someone could manually go through and log what encounters happen with what values, it could be possible to know what encounter a runner would get into in any part of the game. Something like this can be used to track other values as well. This means that critical hits could be timed, first strikes could happen every battle, and the perfect run could be obtained. Here's the thing though. Scripts and other outside modifications are not allowed in Mystic Quest speedruns, like most other runs in the retro scene. This means that there would need to be other ways to find out how to do things like encounter manipulation. If there was some possible way to manipulate the encounter table on startup, or on file select to start and advance the same way after starting the game, then every encounter could be the same, possibly saving minutes without much effort. Okay, so maybe I wasn't entirely clear in the title, but imagine that we've unlocked the secret of the game, but now we just have to take it to the next level and open the door to truly take advantage of it. Unlocking the last secret of Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is one that maybe not all will appreciate, but thanks to the efforts of multiple people around the community, the game is just one step closer to reaching its full potential. One day soon, the incomplete formulas and information listed on sites across the internet will be filled with things that even casual players can use to make their playthroughs more enjoyable. Maybe we'll even go as far as bringing the any % category down past the 1 hour and 50 minute barrier without a terrible amount of luck involved. It goes to show that no matter how impossible the odds, over a long enough period of time, someone is going to overcome them, whether it be through sheer luck or some other unique way. Stay hydrated, folks, and thanks for watching.